When she opened her mouth, every bodyguard in the room reached for their weapon. Not because she was a threat, but because what she said in that language meant she knew something she had absolutely no business knowing. Dolores Abrams wiped down the bar the way she always did. Slow circles, quiet hands, eyes down. She'd been the bartender at Cosimo's restaurant for 3 years, and in 3 years, nobody had really looked at her. That was the point. She was background, furniture, the kind of woman powerful men speak freely in front of because they don't believe she's listening. But Dolores was always listening. At 6:47 that evening, 5 men in black suits entered first. Nobody in the restaurant spoke. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone knew what 5 black suits meant. Cosimo was here. But tonight, Cosimo wasn't the one who made the air feel different. Behind him walked an older man, silver hair swept back like he'd never once rushed through a doorway in his life, sharp eyes that moved slowly, taking in everything. A face that didn't smile, but didn't need to. The room bent around him. Dolores recognized him immediately. She'd spent years making sure she would. Antonino Romano, the man who built the empire Cosimo now ran, the Sicilian patriarch who hadn't set foot in this city in over 2 decades. Her hands stayed steady on the bar cloth, her breathing stayed even, but inside, every careful year of preparation came rushing to the surface at once. Now, to understand why a quiet black bartender from Georgia was standing in that room, you have to understand where she came from. Dolores grew up with one story. Her grandmother told it in pieces, never all at once, never loudly, always at night in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and old wood, in a language that had no business being spoken in rural Georgia. Sicilian. Not Italian, Sicilian. The old dialect, the kind from specific mountain villages that outsiders couldn't even follow. Her grandmother, Maria, had made her learn it like a second heartbeat. Speak it clean, she'd say, like you were born there. Dolores never fully understood why, until the night Maria told her the truth, about Sicily, about a man named Antonino, about why they ran, and about the one thing Maria made her promise. If she ever found herself close enough to that world, she would not waste the moment. So, when Antonino slowly sat down on the bar stool in front of her, Dolores set down her cloth, reached for the aged wine, and spoke, not in English, not in Italian, but in the deep, rounded sounds of old Sicilian dialect. Benvenuto, Don Antonino. The glass in Cosimo's hand stopped moving. A bodyguard shifted, and the old patriarch lifted his eyes slowly, like a man who had just heard a voice from 40 years ago. Cosimo didn't say a word. He just looked at her. That slow, dangerous kind of look that meant his mind was already 3 steps ahead. Then he turned to the room. Everyone out. Not loud. Didn't need to be. The restaurant emptied in under 60 seconds. Waitstaff, guests, everyone. Gone. He led them through a side door, down a short hallway, into a private lounge most employees didn't even know existed. Dark wood panels, low lighting, a single bottle of aged Marsala on the table. The kind of room where quiet conversations happened, the kind that never left the building. Dolores walked in calmly. She'd imagined this room before. Not this exact room, but a room like it. She sat down, hands folded, breathing steady. Don't rush, don't perform, just answer. Antonino didn't sit immediately. He stood by the window, studying her the way you study something that shouldn't exist. Then he started talking. And listen, he didn't ease into it. No warm-up, no simple questions. He went straight into rapid, deep Sicilian dialect. The kind that makes even northern Italians lean in confused, like, wait, what language is this even? He asked about the harvest seasons, about the names of saints celebrated in certain villages, about an old Sicilian proverb that had no direct translation. fast, sharp, testing every gap. Dolores answered every single one. Clean. No hesitation, no searching for words. The accent wasn't learned, it was lived. Cosimo watched from the corner. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Because Cosimo had grown up hearing that dialect from his father, he knew what it sounded like when someone performed it. This wasn't that. Antonino went quiet. The room went quiet with him. He finally sat down, poured himself a small glass of marsala, and asked the question slowly. Qui ti insegnò? Who taught you? Dolores didn't flinch. My grandmother. Antonino's finger stopped on the rim of his glass. Your grandmother. He said it like he was tasting the words, trying to decide if he believed them. Cosimo leaned forward slightly. Where was she from? Dolores looked at him briefly, then back at Antonino. She never told me the name of the village. She paused. But she told you yours. Okay. The temperature in that room just dropped about 15 degrees. Cosimo straightened. Even the bodyguard near the door shifted. Antonino's jaw tightened. What did you say? Dolores held his gaze. Calm, quiet, certain. She said if I ever found you, I'd know exactly what to say. Antonino set his glass down, slowly. What was her name? Not a question, a demand wrapped in a whisper. Dolores answered. Maria Bellomo. The glass didn't shatter. Antonino didn't shout. He just stilled. Every muscle, every breath, like the name had reached into his chest and grabbed something. Cosimo looked at his father. He had never, in his entire life, seen that expression on that face. Impossibile, the old man whispered. And for the first time since Dolores walked into that lounge, Dolores felt the weight of everything her grandmother never fully explained. It was heavier than she expected. They didn't stay in the restaurant long after that. Cosimo made a single hand gesture, and within minutes they were moving. The limousine was black, long, quiet, the kind of vehicle that doesn't get pulled over, ever. Dolores sat across from Antonino, city lights sliding past the tinted windows, the silence between them heavy enough to touch. Cosimo sat beside his father, arms crossed, watching her like she was either the most important person in the room or the most dangerous, maybe both. Antonino finally spoke, low, measured, like a man choosing every word carefully. Maria Bellomo, he began, was not just a name from my past. He stared at the floor of the car. She was someone important, in Sicily, inside the organization. He paused. And then one day, she was simply gone. He snapped his fingers softly, like smoke. Cosimo glanced at his father, because in 40 years, he had never once heard that name spoken out loud. What happened to her? Dolores asked quietly. Antonino looked up. That is what nobody ever fully answered. There was a betrayal inside our network. Someone gave information to our enemies. Maria, she knew too much. She saw too much. He shook his head slowly, and then she disappeared before anyone could ask her what she knew. Dolores nodded, like pieces she'd been carrying for years were finally clicking into place. She didn't disappear, Dolores said. She ran. Antonino's eyes sharpened. She came to America, changed her name, changed everything. Raised my mother in Georgia, far away from anything Italian, anything Sicilian. Dolores paused. Except the language. She kept the language. The car hummed through the night. Nobody spoke for a moment. Cosimo uncrossed his arms slowly, because the story was starting to land differently now. This wasn't just history. This was covered-up history. Antonino leaned forward. His voice dropped. Why did she run, Dolores? The way he said her name, it was the first time he'd used it. Gentle, almost careful, like he already half knew the answer and was afraid of it. Dolores took a slow breath. Because someone tried to kill her. The bodyguard in the front seat didn't move, but his shoulders tightened. Cosimo said nothing. Someone inside your circle, someone with enough power to make her death look like nothing. Antonino sat back, and for a man who had survived decades in one of the most dangerous worlds on Earth, he suddenly looked old, tired. Who? He asked. Dolores reached into her bag, slowly, deliberately. She pulled out a small photograph, black and white, worn edges, creased down the middle like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. She handed it to Antonino. He took it, held it under the dim cabin light. 3 people in the photo, a young woman, a young Antonino, and a third man, standing close, smiling wide. The kind of smile that said, "I am trusted here." Antonino's face drained, not slowly, all at once, like the blood just left. His hand began to tremble, just slightly, but Dolores noticed. Cosimo leaned over to look at the photo. "Papa," he said carefully, "who is that?" Antonino didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the face of the third man, a man he had grieved, a man he had buried in his memory decades ago. His closest friend, his most trusted ally, the man everyone believed was dead. "Dio mio," he whispered. The mansion was exactly what you'd expect. Gates, cameras, men at the door who didn't smile. The kind of house that doesn't appear on any real estate listing. Ever. Antonino's private study was at the end of a long corridor. Dark shelves, old books, a desk that had probably heard confessions most priests never would. He sat down slowly, set the photograph on the desk in front of him, just stared at it. Cosimo stood to the side. Dolores sat across from the old man, waiting, because she'd waited this long already. A few more seconds wasn't going to hurt. "Salvatore Rizzi," Antonino finally said. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. "He was my lieutenant, my right hand." He touched the edge of the photograph. "For 15 years, I trusted that man with everything." He paused. "And then, one day, he was gone. We found his car, burned near the coast. We assumed the worst." He looked up at Dolores. "We buried an empty coffin." Cosimo pushed off the wall. "You're saying he faked his death?" Dolores nodded slowly. "My grandmother didn't find out until it was almost too late." She leaned forward slightly. Rizzi had discovered something, a secret Maria was keeping for Antonino. Information powerful enough to shift the entire balance inside the organization. And instead of bringing it to Antonino, she paused. He decided to use it for himself. Antonino's jaw tightened. "What kind of secret?" "She never told me the details," Dolores said honestly. "She said the less I knew, the safer I'd be." She looked at him carefully. "But she told me it was big enough that Rizzi couldn't let her live once he knew she'd seen him take it." Antonino closed his eyes briefly, like he was doing math in his head. Old, painful math. "So he tried to kill her," Cosimo said quietly. "He sent 2 men to her apartment," Dolores confirmed. "She got out through a back window." She almost smiled. "My grandmother was 63 years old and climbed out a second-floor window in the dark." Cosimo blinked. "Okay, respect." Even Antonino's expression softened for half a second. "She took nothing," Dolores continued. "New name, new city, eventually a new country. But she never stopped watching the news from Sicily, never stopped reading, listening, checking, because she believed, deep down," Dolores paused, "that Rizzi was still out there." Antonino opened his eyes. "And before she died," Dolores held his gaze, "I gave her one instruction." The study went completely silent. Even the old clock on the shelf seemed to pause. Find Antonino Romano. Tell him what I know, and make sure he understands. Dolores took a slow breath, set both hands flat on the desk, and said it quietly, like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in an empty room. Rizzi isn't dead. Antonino didn't move. Cosimo didn't move. The photograph sat between them all, the third man's smile staring up from the desk, wide, warm, patient, like a man who had always known this moment would eventually come.
Cosimo didn't sleep that night. Nobody did. By 3 a.m., the study had transformed into something else entirely. Laptops open, phones buzzing, 3 of his best men moving quietly around the room like ghosts. Antonino sat in his chair the whole time, didn't eat, didn't speak much, just watched. The search took until morning, because here's the thing about a man who fakes his death and disappears for 40 years. He doesn't just hide, he rebuilds. And Rizzi had been very, very thorough. It was Marco, Cosimo's youngest analyst, who found it first. He set a printed document on the desk quietly. Samuel Rizzi, he said. Import and Export, Harbor District. Cosimo picked it up. He registered the company 22 years ago, appeared out of nowhere, no traceable history before that. He looked at Cosimo carefully. No birth records that hold up past a certain date. Cosimo slid the document across to Antonino. The old man looked at the name. Samuel Rizzi. 1 letter changed. Just 1. Like he wanted to stay close to himself, without being found. Antonino laughed. Not warmly. The short, tired laugh of a man who just realized he'd been outplayed for 2 decades. Figlio di, he muttered. Cosimo wisely chose not to translate that for the room. How big is the operation? Cosimo asked Marco. Marco pulled up a screen. Shipping routes lit up across the monitor. Mediterranean, West Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. Dolores leaned forward slightly from her seat in the corner, because that map looked less like a business and more like a network. He's not just moving cargo, said Cosimo slowly. No, Marco confirmed. The shipping company is the cover. Antonino stood up for the first time in hours, moved toward the screen, studied it carefully. He used our old routes, he said quietly, the same corridors we built in the 70s. He shook his head. He didn't just survive. He inherited what we built, and built something bigger on top of it. The room sat with that for a moment. Which, yeah, that's a lot to sit with before breakfast. Dolores spoke from the corner. My grandmother believed he was waiting. Everyone turned. She said Rizzi never fully disappeared because he wanted to be found eventually. She paused. He was waiting for Antonino to come back to this side of the world. Cosimo frowned. Why? Dolores shook her head slowly. She didn't know, but she said whatever Rizzi took from her, whatever secret it was, it only becomes useful when Antonino is close enough to be destroyed by it. The silence that followed was the heavy kind. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Cosimo, his voice dropped low. One of our perimeter contacts near the harbor just flagged something. Cosimo turned. Rizzi's people were asking questions last night about a private car leaving Cosimo's restaurant. They already know Antonino is in the city. Antonino turned from the screen, his eyes sharp again, the tiredness gone, replaced by something older, something colder. The look of a man who survived 40 years in a world that tried to bury him repeatedly and was done being surprised. Then we stop waiting, he said simply. By noon, Cosimo's headquarters looked like a different building. Extra men at every entrance, cameras checked twice, vehicles repositioned, the kind of quiet reorganization that meant one thing. Something serious was coming, and they were choosing to meet it standing up. Dolores sat in the corner of the main room again.
She'd been offered a guest room twice, declined both times. She wasn't leaving until this was finished. Antonino noticed that. Didn't say anything, but he noticed. He called Cosimo and Dolores into a smaller side room mid-afternoon, poured 3 glasses of water, sat down, and for the first time he told the full story. 40 years ago, he began, I was preparing to expand the organization, new territories, new alliances. Rizzi was beside me for all of it. He paused. What I didn't know was that Rizzi had been building something else entirely. He turned the glass slowly in his hand. A parallel structure inside our own network. Men loyal to him, not to me. He was planning to remove me, take control, and rebuild everything under his name. Cosimo leaned forward. And Maria found out. Antonino nodded. She overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Names, dates, the plan. She came to warn me. He stopped. His jaw tightened slightly. But before I could act, he moved first. He sent men to silence her. He looked at Dolores directly. Your grandmother ran that night with nothing. And he exhaled slowly. I believed the chaos that followed was his punishment. There was a confrontation, gunfire, a burned car at the coast. We assumed Rizzi died in the fallout. He set his glass down. I assumed wrong. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Dolores processed that. 40 years of a mistake sitting in this old man's chest like a stone. He's been building this whole time, Cosimo said quietly, using our old roots, our old contacts, watching. Antonino nodded slowly, waiting for me to come close enough. He almost smiled. I handed him the moment by coming here, which means, he looked at his son, he has been more patient than I ever gave him credit for. Then Antonino did something unexpected. He turned to Dolores, and the hardness in his face softened just slightly. Your grandmother was brave, he said quietly. She warned me once, and it cost her everything. He paused. And she raised someone brave enough to finish what she started. Dolores felt something tighten in her throat. She nodded once, didn't trust herself to say more. It was a genuinely quiet moment, warm even, which is exactly why what happened next felt like a bucket of ice water. The door swung open hard, Marco breathing fast. Cosimo, his voice was tight. They hit the West Side warehouse, Rizzi's men, 20 minutes ago. Cosimo stood immediately. Antonino's expression closed back up like a shutter snapping shut. Gone was the reflective old man. Back was the patriarch. How many of ours? Cosimo asked. Marco hesitated. 3 down, 2 missing. The temperature in the room dropped immediately. Cosimo turned slowly, eyes cold, steady. He wants us to show him he's not afraid. Antonino picked up his glass calmly, finished the water, set it down clean. He said, quietly, "Good, neither are we."
The harbor at night smelled like salt and rust and old secrets, which, fitting. Cosimo's convoy moved without headlights the last half-mile. 4 vehicles, 12 men, no sirens, obviously. This wasn't that kind of operation. Dolores had insisted on coming. Twice, Cosimo said no. Twice, she ignored him. "I have my grandmother's notes," she said simply. "You don't know what you're looking for. I do." Cosimo stared at her for a long moment, then looked at Antonino. Antonino shrugged slightly. She's not wrong. So here she was, sitting in a black SUV heading toward a potentially violent confrontation at a shipping warehouse, living her absolute best life, clearly. They parked 2 blocks out and moved on foot.
The warehouse was massive, old brick exterior, new security cameras, the kind of building that looked abandoned from the outside but hummed quietly from within. Dolores pulled out a folded piece of paper from her jacket, her grandmother's handwriting, neat, small, careful. She scanned the exterior wall with a small flashlight. There, near the loading dock door, a small marking, barely visible, scratched into the brick, a symbol that looked like two overlapping diamonds. "That's his marker," she whispered. "My grandmother drew this, said Rizzi used it to tag every property he controlled." Cosimo looked at the symbol, then at his men. "We're in the right place." They moved inside fast, and what they found was not just a shipping warehouse. The main floor looked normal enough, crates, forklifts, paperwork stations, but Marco found the floor panel within 4 minutes, lifted it, and below, a tunnel system that had absolutely no business existing under a legitimate business. They went down. The tunnels branched in 3 directions. One path led to a sealed room stacked floor to ceiling with weapons crates, military grade, unmarked. Another path. Cosimo stopped walking when he saw it. Hell cells, small, metal doors, recently used. His jaw tightened immediately. Nobody said anything, because some things don't need commentary. Then the lights cut out completely, and the gunfire started. It came from above, behind, both sides simultaneously. Rizzi's men had been waiting. It was a trap. The tunnel filled with noise and smoke and movement. Cosimo's men moved fast and trained, but Rizzi's people knew the layout, every corner, every exit. Dolores pressed against the wall, heart hammering. This was considerably different from bartending. The fight moved back toward the main floor. Crates shattered, metal rang, men shouted in 3 languages. Cosimo moved through the chaos like he'd been built for it. Calm eyes, controlled breathing. Dangerous the way quiet things are dangerous. And then, through the smoke and the noise and the scattered light, a figure appeared at the far end of the warehouse floor. Older, heavier than the photograph, but the eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, completely unafraid. He stood still while everything erupted around him, like a man who had scripted every second of this. He looked directly at Cosimo and smiled. Cosimo stopped walking. The 2 men stood 20 feet apart. The gunfire continued around them like weather neither acknowledged. "You must be the son," Rizzi said calmly. His accent a strange blend of Sicilian and something else now. 40 years of America wearing the edges smooth. Cosimo said nothing, just looked at him. "Where is your father?" Rizzi asked, almost pleasantly, like they'd arranged this meeting. Cosimo tilted his head slightly. "Close enough." The side door opened, and Antonino walked in, slowly, deliberately, like a man arriving exactly on his own schedule. Rizzi saw him, and something shifted in his face. Not fear, not quite, more like satisfaction. The look of a man who has been waiting so long for something that seeing it finally arrive feels almost like relief. Antonino. He said the name like a toast, warm, familiar, like 40 years meant nothing, like 3 people weren't bleeding on the warehouse floor right now. Antonino stopped 10 feet away, studied the man in front of him, the added weight, the gray, the American clothes. "You got old, Salvatore." Rizzi smiled. "So did you." "Why?" Antonino asked simply, no anger in his voice. Genuine question. "Why all of this?" Rizzi tilted his head. "You really don't know?" He began moving slowly, circling. "You controlled everything, Antonino, every territory, every alliance. I built half of what you called yours, and you treated me like—" He paused. "Staff." Antonino said nothing. "I wanted what I earned," Rizzi continued. "You weren't going to give it.
So I decided to take it. And Maria? Antonino asked quietly. Rizzy's expression flickered, just slightly. She heard things she shouldn't have. I gave her a chance to stay quiet. He shrugged. She didn't take it. Cosimo's hand moved toward his jacket. Antonino raised one finger without even looking at him. Don't. Cosimo stilled, frustrated, but still. Rizzy continued moving. I searched for her for years, you know. 3 continents, 12 different contacts. He laughed softly. She was good, I'll admit that. Maria Bellomo just evaporated. He glanced toward Dolores now, who stood near the wall, watching him with the focused stillness of someone who had imagined this moment for a long time. And then, Rizzy said pleasantly, her granddaughter walked into your son's restaurant. He looked back at Antonino, and led me directly to you. Dolores felt that land, like a punch she hadn't braced for. She had been followed. This whole time, Rizzy had been tracking her movements, waiting for exactly this moment. Her grandmother had warned her, and she exhaled slowly, kept her face neutral, filed the guilt away for later. You used a young woman to find me, Antonino said quietly. I used whatever was available, like always. Cosimo shifted his weight, every instinct screaming at him to end this right now. Papa. No. Antonino's voice was calm, final. He took 3 slow steps forward, reached into his coat. This one is mine, Cosimo. Rizzy didn't run, didn't reach for his weapon. He just watched Antonino approach, and in his eyes, something complicated moved through. Something that might have been respect, or maybe just exhaustion. 40 years is a long time to carry a war. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. 1 shot. Clean. And Salvatore Rizzy, who had faked his death, built an empire, hunted a woman across continents, and waited 40 decades for revenge, simply stopped. The warehouse went completely silent. Even the remaining men on both sides held still. Antonino stood over him for a moment, said nothing, then turned quietly and walked back toward Cosimo. That's when they heard it, distant at first, then closer, then unmistakable. Sirens, multiple, moving fast toward the harbor. Cosimo looked at Marco immediately. Marco was already on his phone. Someone called it in, he said tightly. Cosimo scanned the warehouse. 12 men, tunnel system, weapons crates, holding cells, and a body on the floor. He looked at his father. We need to move. Right now. They cleared the harbor with 3 minutes to spare. Cosimo watched through the rear window as police flooded the entrance. The tunnels, the weapons, the holding cells, all of it about to be discovered. He exhaled slowly. It's done, Marco said quietly. Nobody celebrated. In that world, surviving isn't celebrated. It's just noted. Weeks passed. The restaurant reopened. Dolores returned to the bar, but something had permanently shifted. Cosimo spoke to her differently now. Antonino visited every Thursday, and sometimes, when the restaurant emptied, an old Sicilian patriarch and a quiet bartender from Georgia sat together, keeping Maria Bellomo alive the only way that still mattered, in memory, in language, in a story that almost never got told. The final Thursday, Antonino asked his question. Dolores gave her answer. He laughed that quiet, real laugh, and for the first time since Sicily, everything Maria sacrificed felt settled. The lesson? Never underestimate the quiet ones. They exist everywhere, behind bars,
in offices, inside your own family, carrying histories powerful enough to shake entire empires. Now be honest with yourself. You watched this whole story, felt every moment, and you're about to close this without subscribing, without sharing, without a single comment, which means the next person who needs this story never finds it. Dolores carried her grandmother's mission for years before her moment came. The least we can do is carry this story forward for 30 seconds. Subscribe, share, drop one word in the comments that describes Dolores. Don't let this be another quiet thing that disappears.